Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Our topics on today's show: the state budget, the governor's new plan, the Maine governor's race, political insiders versus outsiders in both party primaries, and the Gateway MaineCare fraud investigation. What are the facts? My guests are B.J. McCollister, a Democratic consultant and former chief of staff to former state Senate President Troy Jackson, and Lisa Keim, a Republican, former state assistant minority leader, and now an Oxford County commissioner. Thanks for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Governor Janet Mills has unveiled her final budget to close out her 8 years in office. The supplemental budget, released this week, calls for $600 million in new spending. That's $275 million from new revenue and $325 million from the state's reserve or rainy day fund. More than a third of the proposed new spending, $218 million, would cover the cost of $300 relief checks for 725,000 Maine taxpayers who earn up to $75,000 a year individually or $150,000 as a married couple. The proposed new spending list includes $70 million to build affordable housing, $46 million to maintain that 55% funding of K-12 schools, $25 million for indigent defense attorneys, $6 million to make school buses safer, and $2.5 million for free community college. Here's part of how the governor pitched those relief checks during her State of the State address last week, and how the top Republican on the Appropriations Committee this week, Representative Jack Ducharme, warned against dipping into the state's billion-dollar reserve fund.
We're putting tax dollars back in your pockets, and you will have the freedom to decide what to do with it.
$1 billion in the bank for the state of Maine means 90 days of normal state operations. That's it. 90 days. Most economists are looking at right now, we think maybe there's a 15 to 25% likelihood of a recession. Let's not tap into the rainy day fund.
Lisa Keim, a lot of that new spending would tap into the rainy day fund, not just the proposed relief checks. Your thoughts?
So it's the Budget Stabilization Fund, and it is that very technical term because it's meant to stabilize, and it's statutorily there to only be used in the event that we have some sort of shortfall in our general fund income. And that is not what's happening here. So the governor is putting in language to not withstand that, so basically to ignore existing law and remove money anyway. And that's really putting Maine in a bad position financially. And everyone, I think Mainers can all see that these checks are campaign gimmicks for her. She's just buying votes. But you know, she's saying she's giving money back. She's taking money from taxpayers and redistributing it. And then she has this housing thing that she calls the American Dream. Again, taxpayer funded. I don't think she understands that the American Dream is not supposed to be taxpayer funded. It's actually something that people do to work, and they work for themselves to get it. So a lot of her spending here is really, you know, I think a slap in the face to Maine people, but most especially the increase, and we're going to get into this later in the show, but the increase to MaineCare funding, about $116 million, $188 million is going to the Department of Health and Human Services, which has been shown to have really overbilling issues. And in fact, I just want to point out the recent federal report audit that found just in 1 year, 2023, $46 million of improper payments for child autism. And half of that is going to have to be returned to the federal government. Of that, they also said that because this is systemic and widespread overbilling issues where they're not getting proper documentation and they're not making sure that these claims really exist, they're saying that there's actually another $22 million that's likely also to be fraudulent. So when you look at just this one section of MaineCare, which is the autism, it's gone from $52 million in 2019 to over $80 million in 2023. And the federal government is claiming in 2023 that more than half of those payments were improper. So there's so much waste already in this department, totally being ignored, and yet she's going to, you know, say, I'm taking another $188 million from hardworking Maine people and putting it into the budget of DHHS, which is $7 billion. $7 billion is what our entire state was funded on before she took office.
And now it's up to $12 billion, BJ, over 2 years if this additional spending were to pass. Lisa's got a lot of grievances and it's too much. What's your view?
Well, I mean, I think first let's start off with the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund is at the highest level, the statutory maximum that it's allowed allowed to be at. And even with these withdrawals from the rainy day fund, she is maintaining a rainy day fund that is well above any rainy day fund that Republican Paul LePage ever oversaw. So clearly there's been good management of the budget process in the state. But then when you step back and you look at where she's appropriating these funds, they are really important things that Mainers care about. For example, housing. With her housing proposal, she's proposing a variety of uses of the funds that direct towards affordable housing, towards helping families buy their first homes, helping middle income families with the housing crisis. And it's with good reason. I mean, it is a rainy day when you think about the housing crisis. We need 84,000 units by 2030. And so she's investing that money in a smart way and continuing to build more housing. I mean, I do think that there is a good debate to happen around the $300 checks, and I agree with Lisa on this, because I think that there are other ways to get relief to Mainers other than just sending them a check in the mail. We've seen the state give people discounts on their electricity bill, for example. That could be a wise use of the same funds so that everybody could benefit from it. But I think when we just send checks out to people, it's a Band-Aid. We need systematic change to make sure that we can address the affordability crisis our state is facing.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into the Maine governor's race. One way to look at the Maine governor's race is a contest between political outsiders versus political insiders. Let's start with the Democratic candidates. This week, Angus King III, the son of our U.S. Senator, held his first press conference and unveiled an energy plan. Lower costs, more efficiency for the grid, more accountability from the utilities. This is his first run for office after a career developing affordable housing and renewable energy. I asked him why Democratic voters who care about climate change should choose him over Hannah Pingree, an architect of the Mills climate plan Maine Won't Wait, who's been endorsed by Maine conservation voters.
Yeah, I think to me that there's a big difference between people who have spent their careers in government working on reports about climate and people who have been out in the world building climate projects.
My background is I've been spending my life building things that have been solving problems to help people. And a lot of that work is, well, I'll tell you, and I think right now we've got to really be focusing on different solutions.
Another first-time candidate, Dr. Nirav Shah, moved to Maine 7 years ago to lead the state CDC, then spent 2 years away as number 2 in the national CDC during the Biden administration. This week, he became the first Democrat to turn in his ballot petition.
Mainers are telling us that they want not politicians, but leaders. Leaders who show up, who listen, and deliver.
Not quite amateurs, but certainly newcomers on the ballot. BJ, what do you make of that versus the other candidates who are more well-known office holders in the Democratic primary?
I think it's fair to describe Dr. Shah as more of a first-time newcomer outsider. I don't think you can call Senator King's son an outsider necessarily. I mean, right now we are seeing a race that is shaping up that shows that Dr. Shah is tapping into something that people are excited about. Obviously, turning your petitions first, that sounds like a small order, but that's a tremendous amount of organizing that has to happen, and to do it so quickly demonstrates that he's got a campaign operation in place. The public polling shows that he is leading the pack. He released a poll, I think this week or last week, that showed he was leading the pack with everyone else mostly tied. But what I'd remind folks is this is early. And right now, many of those polls, they are just based on name ID. And of course, while we were all making sourdough during the pandemic, we were watching him every afternoon. So Democratic voters know his name, and I think that that's why he's rising to the top. There's a lot of campaign to go, and I think we'll see some shakeups.
What do you think? The two newcomers versus people like Hannah Pingree, Shanna Bellows, and Troy Jackson who've held high office in our state?
It's all, to me, it's all more of the same. It's Democrats looking to run our state, and they're serving political ideology rather than serving the people of Maine. So if Mainers want more of the same, to be the 5th highest tax state in the nation, to see our education where it has fallen from 19th to 45th, to be like the 8th worst for business climate, seeing our young people leave and our budget balloon, if that's what people want more of, then they've got a slew of candidates right there to pick from in that Democrat primary.
You can't wait for our next block when we talk about the Republicans. Back to the Democrats, though, for a second. You know, you're going to hear those arguments in the general election. It's kind of hard to go there now because we have such a robust primary competition on both sides. But I've noticed, BJ, that the Democrats seem to sort of be trying to outdo each other, since they don't know who the Republican opponent is or who the independents are necessarily. They're trying to outdo each other who can be the most anti-Trump, whether it's talking about ICE, whether it's talking about other policies that the Trump administration has been pursuing, many of which are controversial. What's your view of that? Why are they doing that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating thing about the crowded primary, because you've got candidates that are trying to do two things. One, get people's attention, which is a very difficult thing to do at this stage of the game. But then two, they have to appeal to those primary voters once they have their attention. And obviously, a Democratic primary voter likes hearing the anti-Trump messages. And I think what's always fascinating in this race, but any race, is when you have a crowded primary, you have to quickly win that primary and then pivot to the full voting population and make sure that you haven't alienated everyone. Now, I think some of these arguments that the candidates are making are probably popular based on any public polling that we've seen to date, and so they have to be careful about like how much they want to appeal to the progressive bloc while still maintaining a pathway with the undecided voters that they will be appealing to during the general election.
And Lisa, how much do you think President Trump's aura and policies, while he's not on the ballot, will affect these primaries?
Oh, it'll impact them a lot. That's, I think, one of the largest factors happening in all down ticket races. You know, all ticket races coming up in these midterms is, you know, what's happening nationally. What's the temperature around Trump? So, yeah, there's like an absolute hatred, pretty myopic, really, so focused on Trump when really there's so many issues here at home that really need to be the focus of our governor, not Trump. And so I would like to see everyone focus on what can we do for Maine regardless of what's happening nationally. And it's unfortunate that's the really myopic stance of the Democrats is just full on anti-Trump.
And BJ, let me give you a pass at this question for the Democrats. Governor Mills, among Democratic primary voters, no matter what they think about the Senate race, I think it's fair to say is generally popular with the Democratic base. How much, if at all, should these five candidates be positioning themselves to be her heir, her successor? Maybe that's a double-edged sword as well. How do you see that?
I think the interesting thing about what we're seeing nationally in the political climate is there's a real appetite for a change type election. So I do think that they have to clearly demonstrate that they're going to do things a little bit differently. And I do think you're seeing people talk about that, whether it's them talking about what they would do with things like tribal sovereignty or what they would do related to, you know, some positions on organized labor. I think people are trying to demonstrate that while there have been wins under the Mills administration, that they would be different in a certain way so they can appeal to that change type electorate.
You see them winning whoever the nominee is, winning many Republican votes?
I don't see them winning Republican votes, but you know, as BJ said, what both parties are going to have to look for is the unenrolled voters, right? Those that are really, you know, looking for probably solutions to the problems they see right at home, and that's where we're going to have to. Both parties are going to have to focus. So first, they have to win the primary, and I just have to say, Angus, energy bill of rights. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. We need to focus on something real, like real policy changes that actually impact Maine people. Their energy prices are increased, a lot of that due to renewable, and still all those Democrats are saying, yep, we need more renewables, focus on renewables, and yet all the facts are showing us that those policies are what's hurting Maine people. So again, more of the same.
And if you want to learn more about Angus King III, you can watch my full interview with him on NCM Plus, our streaming platform. And we'll take another break. When we come back, the Republican candidates for governor. Continuing our discussion of this year's governor's race, most of the Republican candidates have never held office before. Sure, there's York County Senator James Libby. He's running. Another exception is former Senator and Majority Leader Garrett Mason. Mason, who was the runner-up in the 2018 Republican primary, won by Sean Moody, launched his campaign only this month. This week, he announced the endorsement of 40 current or former state and local elected officials. And as promoting his candidacy started running, paid for by the Restoration of America Super PAC, which is backed by Midwestern billionaire Richard Uihlein, Mason has framed the race this way on his video podcast.
Maine does not have time in 2026 for a political hobbyist. We don't have time for someone to come in and learn on the job. We have to have somebody who's already been there.
Mason gets going. One of those political newcomers, Robert Wessels, who once served on his town selectman board, became the first Republican to submit his ballot petition.
So I am a normal, everyday Mainer, a businessman in the town of Paris. I've run retail stores for the last 20 years and really just fed up with the way our state is going.
5 other Republican candidates who've raised the most money have no prior elective experience. Jonathan Bush, Bobby Charles, Ben Midgley, David Jones, Owen McCarthy. Charles, by the way, served in the Reagan and first Bush administrations. He was a naval intelligence officer and assistant secretary of state. The others have extensive business experience. Lisa Keim, what do you make of this field besides how long it is?
It's a very large field. I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed with the caliber of candidates that we have in the field. I love what that speaks for Maine. It's men who have been very engaged and successful with businesses and in their work life, coming to make a difference here in Maine. And I think it speaks volumes for the Republican Party. The differences among them are pretty strong, just in their maybe social stances. But I would say on economics and getting Maine back on track, they are fairly similar and really united on that. So I'm excited to see how this shakes out. I'm eager that it does shake out soon, because the list is too long and it's hard for people to kind of pick and choose among them. I do think it's incredibly important, as Garrett Mason said, we need to start moving on day one, and because there's a lot of changes that need to happen in Maine government if we really want to make this a place that's affordable for Maine people and see businesses be able to expand and grow and see families thrive. So those changes, they can't go slowly. We can't like wait for someone to figure out how to make this all happen. There's got to be a good plan, and a plan that can be implemented on day one. Fortunately, I do see a lot of the candidates here really able to do that. They know how to be in that position of leadership and to make things happen. So I haven't yet come up with my one choice, but I would say there's several in the group that I could wholeheartedly endorse and say they're going to do a fantastic job for Maine.
BJ, what about Garrett Mason's point that you have to know where the levers of power are, which ones to pull and which ones not to pull? Like you guys, you've been in Augusta. I mean, it was 10 or 15 years ago since he was in leadership, but still, that's differentiates him from most of the field. Yeah,
I mean, there's a really fascinating dynamic that's shaping up in this primary and focusing on 3 people in particular. You've got Midgley, who is plugging into some of the LePage network on his campaign apparatus, which obviously has demonstrated good success in primaries among Republican voters. You've got Bobby Charles, who is throwing all the red meat to Republican primary voters. And back to our last segment, we were talking about if you go too far, you might impact undecided voters. I think that that's definitely where Bobby Charles is leaning towards right now, but he is talking directly to the base Republican voter. And then you've got Garrett, and Garrett's got this, as you mentioned, this money coming in. I think it's about $500,000 in TV ads that have been placed at this point. He has been very smart. He created his own podcast, so he's got a platform, he's developing an audience, and he's done it before. He's run before, and even though he didn't succeed, oftentimes we say you learn more when you lose. And so it's really, I would say it's between the 3 of them, and thankfully we've got this great system called ranked choice voting, so Republicans can take their pick.
Garrett, I believe, is a social conservative. How important are the social issues in the Republican primary? We hear a lot of the tax and spending issues up front, but there's always more to it than that. And religious conservatives, to the extent we have them as a bloc in Maine, are usually very motivated voting bloc.
Yeah. I think it is very important, and especially in the primary. So that will be a whole block that all of these candidates will have to speak to. And I think Garrett Mason has an edge on that, especially from running previously. He's already connected with those voters once before. So I think he does have an edge there of connection, and that will definitely play out strongly, I believe, in our candidate mix. And I would agree. I think I think BJ sort of named a good pool of who I think might be bubbling up to the top. But again, it's still early days, and so much depends on how these candidates get out and actually meet the voters. And honestly, there's really few voters that end up deciding who our candidates are. So few people vote in the primaries that those connections to them can be somewhat personal, and it's really key. So we don't know yet.
And independence will be key. We should remind people we have semi-open primaries, so if you're unenrolled or independent, you can vote in either one if you have a favorite or someone you want to vote against.
Yeah, I don't know how often they are voting. I didn't look at have you looked?
Well, this is like an interesting thought process that we've all been going through, and all the data shows it's very hard to get people to vote in a way that they haven't voted before. That's why campaigns talk to likely voters and not people who vote, 1 out of every 10 elections. And so I think the campaigns have to figure out how to, one, educate people that they can vote in the primary, but then actually turn them out to vote on primary day, because normally they don't vote on primary day.
Okay, well, we're just at the beginning of the campaign. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into the Gateway Maine Care investigation. Federal and state investigations are underway of Gateway Community Services, a healthcare company founded and run by Somali immigrants that has been accused of overbilling the state's Maine Care program, our version of Medicaid. Gateway has offices in Lewiston and Portland. 3 state audits have found $1.6 million in overbilling between 2017 and 2022. So far, Gateway has paid back all $125,000 from the first audit. It's appealing the other 2 audits. The State Department of Health and Human Services has suspended further payments to Gateway and referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office. Maine Republicans especially have been pressing the case.
There's a lot of frustration from our side of the aisle, feeling like these concerns aren't being taken seriously. How long do you get? In no other sphere would you get to take money from the government, not pay it back, and just be granted absolute immunity. Just you don't have to pay it back. There's no timetable on when you have to pay it back.
President Trump has generally talked about the alleged fraud, comparing it to the much more massive welfare fraud in Minnesota that's resulted with 60 people being criminally convicted and $1 billion stolen. Still, this was the president last month.
They have the same thing, Somali in Maine. Who would think? I never saw that happening. But in Maine, it's really crooked as hell, too.
Well, Lisa Keim, your party has called for this. There's your former colleague, Matt Harrington, kind of leading the charge. What's your view of where we are right now in this probe, in this controversy?
So first of all, that 1.6 overbilling, that's only in the 21-22 years of the audit. And what's really important to recognize is that Maine only suspended payments to Gateway after there became an outcry and after the feds started investigation. They were, as Harrington suggested, sort of letting this go on, and they bill $5 million annually from 2019 to 2024. And then when you take that along with the whistleblower allegations that's saying there is really widespread fraud, I think the federal government is going to find a lot more fraud than just this overbilling that DHHS has found of the 1.6. What's really troubling here is that basically the entire time Mills has been in office, there's been an ongoing audit of Gateway, and yet there's been hundreds of thousands of dollars given to them in no-bid contracts. They even got $65,000 in the Lewiston shooting. So something here really stinks. And when you take that, knowing that the Mills administration actually was given a report back in 2020, as reported by the BDN, written by Brian Pellerin, and that was basically following up on a 2019 charge against a company called Facing Change, because they had widespread fraud in interpreter services.
But that's not Gateway.
It's not Gateway,
Okay.
It's another one, but it's interpreter services. And a lot of what we're seeing in Gateway is also problems with interpreter services. And then this Pellerin report shows that payments for interpreter services went from 800,000 to 4 million, even though at the time patients and immigrants had decreased.
So there are other nonprofits that you think need to be investigated,
Absolutely.
as well as more recent spending in Gateway.
Yes, and
Okay.
there was credible information to the Mills administration about this that has gone completely ignored. And since then, there's been many other companies, like 2 or 3 other companies, that now we absolutely know have also.
Well, you don't know. How do you know?
Oh, because let's see.
There's a story.
Oh yeah, there's absolutely a story.
Let me bring BJ into the
Yeah.
conversation, because there's 5,200 companies that bill Maine Care. And DHHS in a hearing recently just said they just have 52 employees that are involved in this audit process. So maybe there aren't enough people to do the kind of work Lisa's talking about. What's your view of where this probe stands and what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, look, fraud and abuse is always bad and needs to be acted upon. And I think, as we saw in the segments that you all did, 52 people are responsible for all of this, and that is not enough folks to dig in. Like, I do think that if we're serious about fraud and abuse, which we should be at the appropriations table in Augusta putting more people on the job, and that requires investment from the state of Maine to make sure that people are following these programs correctly. I will say this is a very difficult dynamic for the Mills administration, because they are going through the audit process, which they're not able to really comment on. The AG isn't able to really comment on an active investigation. And so the no comment essentially that's coming from the Mills administration, their hands are tied because of the process they're going through. But publicly, that looks very bad.
We just have a minute left. Would you support more state spending to hire more auditors in DHHS?
Well, there's an Office of Inspector General report that showed that Maine had the least number of investigations and fraud in the entire country. So we haven't been looking for it, even though we had a Pellerin report which showed we should be. The other thing is Bright Future Healthier You, which is actually Maine's top biller for interpreter services. They also were found a year ago for tax fraud schemes that were similar to what we're seeing possibly come out with Gateway. So this has been bubbling up for a long time, absolutely ignored by Mills. We need to be asking why.
Quickly, last word here, this kind of sort of out of left field, but do you think, we've heard the president's comments, was this in any way a pretext for the ICE surge into Maine, do you think, like it was in Minnesota, if it was a pretext there?
I'm not sure it was.
Okay.
I think that they came here maybe because there was some reporting related to this, but I don't know if it is a direct link the way it was in
Just
Minnesota.
Somali immigrants involved in both. All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. That's our show. Thank you, Lisa Keim and BJ McCollister. And if you want to learn more about the Gateway probe, take a look at Chris Costa's reporting on newscentermaine.com. That's our show. Thanks for watching.